Effective teachers in multicultural classrooms see themselves as lifelong learners and are always asking themselves questions about themselves, their students, the curriculum, and the environment that they create. Some of the questions that it's important to ask yourself as a teacher is, what do I know about myself? And what do I know about my own beliefs? What do I know about others who are different from me? And how do I teach? How do I teach in relationship to what I know about myself and my students? Which means then that we also have to ask questions about our students. What are my students' cultural backgrounds? And thinking about that not just as ethnicity or the country that they come from, but what are their gender identities? What is their social class? What's the geography that they bring with them, their religion? All those aspects of identity that will affect who they are in the classroom. And importantly, what do my students know about each other? And what do my students know about people who are different from themselves? And how do my students learn best? That will be different for different learners. But we can't assume because they come from a particular cultural or ethnic or religious background that they will all learn the same. A third area of questioning is about the curriculum. For whom are the curriculum materials designed? What do the materials I use in my classroom teach about differences and about cross-cultural experiences? And what kind of attitudes and beliefs do the materials that I use instill in my students? And finally, we need to ask questions about the classroom environment. What's the emotional and psychological climate of my classroom? How safe do my students feel? How do I make them feel like they belong? How do I control this environment? And what are the needs of my students that I pay attention to? And what are things that I might be overlooking? These are a lot of questions to ask, but over time and on a constant basis, it's important that we reflect on who we are, who our students are, and how we create a space for each of us to be able to thrive and to learn. I've talked already about cultural practices. Schooling also is a cultural practice. And to be successful in school, students have to understand the practices that are involved. They need to know where to sit and where to look in the classroom. They have to know how to behave inside the classroom and outside in the hallway. They need to know when to talk and when to raise their hands. They need to know how to address the teacher by their first name, by their last name, whether to work with or compete against other students. Some of the other cultural practices of schooling have to do with the organization of school. For example, who's allowed to go to school? It may seem like a funny question here in Finland, but in fact, in some places, not everybody is allowed to go to school. On the other hand, who must go to school and for how long? Different places have different ages that are compulsory for students to attend. What age do students begin formal schooling? And how long is the school day? How many days in the school week? If you've never been outside of your own system, you may be surprised to find that some places start school when students are 4 years old, or that the school day is the same length every day for every person. Part of the cultural practices of schooling are also, what's the role of teachers? What's the status of teachers? When do you become a teacher? And what's the level of respect that you get in the society? In every society, schools act as a socialization agent. In all countries, in all cultures, schools do much more than just teach the content or teach students how to read and write. Schools socialize students in how to act in the larger society, and they prepare students for all the roles that are needed to keep a society functioning. And this means in most cases that schools act to perpetuate the status quo. In a divided society that depends on manual labor, schools help to keep certain people in the manual labor jobs by keeping them out of high school. In societies where equality is much more prevalent in the larger society, then you will find that students are prepared across the board to be successful in the society. Cultural practices of schooling are related to the socialization practices. For example, where is the center of attention? In an authoritarian society, the whole center of attention may be on the teacher and on the teacher alone. In a more egalitarian society, then the attention may be on the students and between the students and with the teacher. Are students expected to talk to each other? Are they easily able to? Is that something they're going to be able to do in the jobs that they have when they get older? Are materials available for the taking, or are they only given out by the teacher? And what's the message that's sent if students are allowed to decide for themselves that they can get what they need, or if the teacher is seen as the sole person who can make the decision? What kind of job would that mean that they're getting prepared for in later life? Do you wear your shoes on, or you take your shoes off? Can students choose where to sit? Sometimes, always, or never? This is all part of the socialization process that's going on in schools. And what we know from research is that there are differing outcomes of these socialization processes, especially when people from different cultures come into a new mainstream. The 4 areas are assimilation, acculturation, accommodation, and pluralism and biculturalism. I'll talk a little bit about each one of these. Assimilation is the idea that a person who comes in and has a separate identity from the mainstream society becomes swallowed up. The social, economic, and political integration of an ethnic minority into the mainstream, but having to get rid of who you are to become the other. And the only way that the minority can have access to power and privilege is through that mainstream culture, acting like everybody else. What we have to ask ourselves, is this always desirable or even possible? Think about taking on the behaviors of the mainstream society, but still being seen as different because you wear a headscarf or because your skin color is dark. Another part of the socialization process is acculturation, which we could think of as one-way adaptation. So the minority group has to change, and they have to accept new cultural traits in public, so that they may have to lose traditional cultural practices in public, but still maintain their prior ways of being in private and able to operate in both worlds. But still, access to power in accommodation is only through the mainstream culture. A third aspect of socialization would be accommodation, or two-way adapting. And that means that both the minority group and the majority group move towards each other, and each group embraces behaviors and customs and culture of the other. That is, taking on cultural practices, participating in cultural practices that may be different from your own, but this is a two-way exchange of cultures, and it happens both on the surface level and on the at a deeper level. Still in accommodation, access to power happens through the majority culture. And finally, in the process of socialization, there is the possibility of pluralism and biculturalism. There are multiple ways that are embraced and accepted by everyone. Bilingualism as a prerequisite for functioning in all aspects of society by everyone involved, and that people function in multiple cultural contexts, side by side, each with equal access to power and privilege through both groups' cultural practices and behaviors.